Westlake. This is Luca Sica.
This is Panzarella.
In this broadcast, we focused on headline news. The headlines are the main points of the news, which are read on radio or television.
A headline is the gist of the whole news. It is important because it helps the viewers or listeners identify the nature of the news so that they don't have to go through the whole news to understand what is going on.
With the 2020 presidential election creating such a big news cycle, we reported on legitimate issues that have arisen without discussing the candidates themselves.
Before we get into our story, we want to meet with Mr. Shanker to discuss the new shift in the recent stream change instead of asynchronous work. The transition has been hard for many people, and we have Labriola to ask Mr. Shanker a few questions about this new transition.
Hi, I'm Lubrino, and welcome back to the W. Today, we are doing our first Top Talk of the year with Mr. Shanker.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And today, we're going to be talking about the highly discussed new plan for at-home learning. So today, we're just going to answer a couple questions, see what Mr. Shanker has to say about them. And although not being your final decision to go virtual at home, what is your opinion of the new plan?
I have mixed opinions, as always. I have mixed opinions about a lot of things that we're living through in the age of COVID. Here's the reality. There are a lot of voices that play into a system, right, in a school system, K-12. Those voices, each one has their own perspective and their own opinion. Students, parents, Board of Education, administration, faculty. So while there is no panacea of ideal learning in this current model that we're all living through, I think there is examples of good things that can be taken from a lot of different places and possibly adopted, right? So is it ideal? I don't think learning across a computer screen is ever ideal. Otherwise, we'd all be online schools and we wouldn't have any brick and mortar buildings, right? Yeah. But the reality is there are some good things that we can steal from that concept. And I think if we work collectively, both faculty, administration, students, parents doing their part as well, if we work collectively, we can steal kind of those best pieces and try and put those into place.
Sounds good. So next question here. While the Board of Education made the final decision to go ahead and shift the learning plan, were impacted groups given a chance to voice their concerns?
So I think the dialogue that's been ongoing, and I think a lot of this has become much more so between parents and either board members, parents to administration, and really voicing some need for change. And this is not just high school, right? There's been dialogue across the K-12 dialogue, but it has been predominantly parents. The notion and the understanding of how different a high school population is from obviously talking with a third grader. Mm-hmm. I always, and I think most students, especially those that have been here for a number of years, and any former students would always tell you, my leaning is always to grab the opinions of many, faculty, to grab the opinions of students, to grab the opinions of parents and fellow administrators, and really talk it through. I think the dialogue at this point, because this is such a unique stage in which we're kind of living in, and when I mean parents, very concerned about their children and how they are either losing something in this era of COVID. I think the dialogue fell solely between parents and the district, but I do think that there is benefit of still getting some student input.
Yeah. Agreed. So next question here. You're aware that the students are not happy with the new plan, and is there any way to have their voices maybe heard a little more?
Wait, you mean the students don't want this?
No.
Yes, I've talked with a lot of students over the last week and a half since this dialogue has kind of been out there about the concerns. But I do, and here's the biggest thing that I would say. One, their voices do need to be heard. And I think they will through the process. Sometimes, as I said, a system is going to move in a direction. Mm-hmm. Moving in a direction doesn't predetermine this is the only way it goes. It just means, hey, we have to evolve. We have to do something else than what we're doing. What that something else looks like is really where I think student voice and actually partnership with faculty really comes into play. So Yes, so the district wants to make sure that we've added in live streaming and find that middle ground, right, between the different groups vying for more contact time, more instructional time for their children. And at the same breath, up here, with high school students in particular, who can really voice what works best for them, it really behooves us now to have those conversations as we unfold this. What does it look like in the classroom? How do teachers work with the students who, and that's where the relationship really is, right? Between individual teachers and their classroom of kids. That's where the relationship exists, to say what works in my instructional world, right? If I'm in one discipline, if I'm in the arts, think about this class in particular. You know, how would I live stream in students to a broadcast like this and have it be meaningful?
Yeah.
So there's got to be this extreme flexibility, and that dialogue is where student voice is really important, to say what does work for us and what doesn't work for us. So yes, there's definitely going to be opportunity for students to be involved in the move forward. I just think everyone's got to realize that don't assume the worst simply because a change is happening, right?
Yeah.
Let's let it unfold. Let's see where it goes.
So, learning through Google Classroom is a challenge to begin with. How is streaming into the class going to be any better? And I know you kind of covered this a little bit with the last question, but just from last year, is there going to be a new structure this time?
Yeah.
Or?
So I think it's important to know, and you'll see that, like I said, I had done a Screencastify just to send out to students, because there's just no way for me to talk to everybody in this new format. I can't have an assembly. So students will hear my words to some of these changes and some of this new iteration, right, in their classes on Thursday and Friday. But the reality is there are definitely ways to make it work. Is it ever going to work awesome? No. I don't believe, as I said in the beginning, that learning through a computer screen is ever going to replace being here in person and having the peer-to-peer interactions, the teacher-to-student interactions that are necessary for learning. But I do think that what we have learned a lot from last spring until now is, one, the in-person piece, which we've been able to hold on to and maintain because of the pattern that we've established here, and students doing the right thing with mask wearing and distancing and the like, and our community kind of holding on to being one of the few high schools in the area that has yet to have to shut down.
Yeah.
I think that in-learning piece matched with the home day live streaming puts us in a better position than where we were last spring, definitely. And then most importantly is, and you're going to hear this word stated a lot, the need for flexibility in terms of what each individual teacher is doing on a given day, in a given lesson, is really important. If anybody's expecting to actually be sitting on their home day, live streaming in for 6.5 hours watching a computer screen, that's, I think, what I said before. Don't visualize the worst, because that could be the worst. Live streaming for 6.5 hours. And trust me, my daughter, who is in a different district, a junior, has been doing this in September.
Yeah.
And that's, in essence, what they do there. I would not put that here.
Yeah.
The expectation, you know, and we've talked with this, the faculty through department meetings, we've discussed about placing that flexibility in teachers' hands to make the best decision about what works for this lesson. And there are many lessons where what really works best is the live streaming students checking in at the beginning. All right, so we're giving the parents the structure that they want for their students on the home day. They're going to check in the beginning, and some days it might be, yeah, you are staying collectively on with the kids in school. You guys at home live streaming on your home day, we're all going to be together, we're watching an introductory lesson. And that may work for today. Tomorrow you come back to class, you might check in the first minute or two, and I, as the teacher, might now break you out to go do something for 30 minutes independently, off screen, and just work on that task, because I'm going to be working with the students in front of me in the building. And being able to maintain that sense of flexibility is, I think, part of the ingredients that are going to make this better than I think what many students are anticipating it being the worst of. And that's something that's going to be an evolution, right? Nobody's walking into this tomorrow and saying, wow, I got this live streaming thing down pat. I've been prepared for this my whole life, right?
Yeah.
Teachers, like all of us, are living through these changes in the moment.
Yeah.
So that flexibility on everybody's part and a little bit of forgiveness is really critical in this process.
All right. Well, There you have it, Westlake. Thank you for coming to our first Top Talk of the year. This has been Ray Lubrino, signing off.
Thank you.
Did you know that in the United States, the people don't vote directly for the president and vice president? Instead, a system called the Electoral College is used. This system allows voters to vote for electors, who then cast their votes for candidates, a system described in Article 2 of the Constitution. On Monday, December 14, 2020, the electors meet in their state capitals and cast their official votes for president and vice president. This year, there has been a huge debate on whether the Electoral College should still decide who wins the presidency or if they should scratch that and use the popular vote instead. Here's Matt Sardo and Stephen Pryor with more.
I'm Stephen Pryor.
And I'm Matt Sardo.
And you're watching The W. The 2020 presidential election has been looked at as one of the closest and most controversial elections in American history. The Electoral College is a winner-takes-all system, so if the candidate wins the popular vote in the state, they automatically win all the votes from the Electoral College from that state.
So the popular vote matters by state, but overall it is an indirect election. In the 2000 presidential election, Democrat Al Gore was named the victor on election night by a small margin after an intense recount process and the United States Supreme Court decision in Bush versus Gore. Bush won Florida's electoral votes by a margin of only 537 votes out of almost 6 million casts, and as a result became the president-elect. Bush finished with 271 electoral votes to Gore's 266, but he lost the popular vote even though it didn't matter. This is an example of the significance of the Electoral College and the popular vote debate. Some people think that the rules should change and the popular vote should declare the winner, while others think that the Electoral College system is just fine.
That was the first time that's ever happened. Some people want to abolish the Electoral College because they think that it is unfair that a candidate can lose the popular vote but win the Electoral College, therefore giving them the presidency. So the popular vote matters by state, but overall it is an indirect election. In the 2000 presidential election, Democrat Al Gore was named the victor on election night by a small margin after an intense recount process and the United States Supreme Court's decision in Bush versus Gore. Bush won Florida's electoral votes by a margin of only 537 votes out of almost 6 million casts, and as a result became the president. Bush finished with 271 electoral votes to Gore's 266, but he lost the popular vote.
The Electoral College gives a chance for all states' voices to be heard, especially the smaller ones. The Electoral College is very important now more than ever because of this crazy 2020 election.
I'm Stephen Pryor.
And I'm Matthew Sardo. Back to you guys in the studio.
During this year's election, there has been over 160 million voters. That is a record-breaking number. Here is Vinny Bravo and Matt Last with more.
Welcome to the W. This is Matthew Last.
And Vinny Bravo.
This year, the United States broke a voting record during a global pandemic. A record 160 million Americans voted during the 2020 presidential election. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic continued spread across the country, voter turnout is estimated to be its highest in 120 years. This year, 67% of the eligible voters voted. This is because with the whole new pandemic, there are new ways to vote.
With the pandemic going on, there are multiple ways to vote. We have mail-in ballots that have been legalized in all 50 states. But with mail-in ballots, it took more time to count the votes. Also, there's early voting. It reduced the amount of people voting at a time, which lowered the chance of spreading the coronavirus. Voting on app is another option. A smartphone app would allow a large number of voters to cast their ballots from their homes. But doing so could be risky because it's not fully secure. Most Republicans voted in person and Democrats voted early. Voters were encouraged to vote by internet advertising. Ads were seen on Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube. Celebrities were even encouraging voters to get out and be heard.
This election decides the future of our nation. It is one of the most influential decisions in history of the United States due to the global pandemic. With all that being said, this is Matthew Last.
And Vinny Bravo.
Back to you in the studio.
Early voting has influenced the 2020 election a lot. Dom Dimiceli and Paul Julian explain how.
Welcome to the W. I am Dominic Dimiceli.
And I am Paul Julian. Are you aware of the impact of early voting? Early voting has impacted this year's election greatly, with nearly 70% of all votes coming in before Election Day. With mail-in voting and in-person voting being open before Election Day, voting early has been made easier than ever in 2020.
Also, did you know that by Election Day, nearly 99 million Americans had already voted? Secondly, this election, Joe Biden broke the record of most number of votes for a single candidate in one election.
Early voting is one of the main reasons this election had the most votes ever in U.S. history, because it was much easier for people to fit voting in their schedule. And due to the coronavirus, many people chose early voting so they did not have to be in a large group.
With most of the votes coming from early voting, do you think that all states should allow early voting? This has been Dom Dimiceli
And Paul Julian reporting from the W, and back to you in the studio.
Mail-in voting has increased in many states, changing the way people are voting this year. Here's Marc Denunzio with the details.
Hi, welcome to W. This is Marc Denunzio. Do you think mail-in voting was helpful this year, or did it make voting worse? The presidential election of 2020 saw an increase of 65% in voters because so many people chose to submit their vote through mail-in or absentee votes due to coronavirus concerns. Mail-in voting, often called absentee vote or voting by mail, has been slowly but steadily gained traction in the United States. It received a big boost this year as primary season ran head-on into the pandemic. Mail-in ballots just accounted for over half of this year's primary votes cast in 37 out of the 50 states. It seemed likely that mail-in voting will also account for a large share of this fall's general election vote. Even as President Donald Trump raised concerns about the fairness and security of mail-in balloting, mail-in voting had a big impact on the election this year because it caused a lot of controversy with how long it took to finalize counting them. This has been Marc Denunzio, and back to you in the studio.
The state of Georgia has been asked by the Trump administration for a recount. Ben DiGennaro goes over the details.
This is Ben DiGennaro with the W. The recent election has caused increased tension between citizens and politicians. A recount of the votes is taking place in Georgia, as the number of votes for both sides are very close. The tension and frustration caused during the past year leading up to this election was very much noticeable. As the election drew near and both presidential debates passed, animosity among not only supporters but both candidates grew. It was clear from the start that regardless of the election's outcome, there was going to be a large group of very unhappy people. After Joe Biden's victory, there were multiple claims of voter fraud on behalf of Donald Trump and the Republican Party. By request of Georgia's Secretary of State, a recount is taking place in Georgia. According to the Atlanta Voice, a news source local to Atlanta, Joe Biden led by only 0.3%, which warranted a recount as it did not fall within the 0.5% threshold. In Fulton County, there were over 170 teams of people counting votes again, as well as DeKalb County, where votes were recounted in 2 days, all while the Trump supporters staged protests outside the state capitol and the governor's mansion. Their deadline to finish the recount was midnight on November 18th. The results showed the count being even closer than before, but still resulting in a win for Joe Biden. The close vote tally exemplifies how divided the country is. The stress of the pandemic, racial relations, economic distress, on top of all the pressure of the election has caused increased tension. People are frustrated, and it can only be assumed that for the next few months, this tension will remain. Needless to say, the division of the people is the biggest issue with this year's election. Back to you in the studio.
Hi, I'm Matt Labriola here with Westlake's The W. Does the President of the United States matter to you? Well, I have some interesting information behind this year's election. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, there was an increase of mail-in voting. You can request an absentee ballot, fill it out at home, and mail in the ballot from your house or post office. You may think that is very convenient. However, there have been allegations of voter fraud this year, unlike any. Hi, I'm Matt Labriola here with Westlake's The W. Does the President of the United States matter to you? Well, I have some interesting information behind this year's election. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, there was an increase of mail-in voting. You can request an absentee ballot, fill it out at home, and mail in the ballot from your house or post office. You may think that is very convenient. However, there have been allegations of voter fraud this year, unlike any previous presidential election. There have been accusations that ballots were lost, stolen, or thrown away. A New Jersey postal worker was accused of dumping 1,800 pieces of mail, including election ballots. Many Americans are skeptical because they believe their vote should count, and when people hear news like this, it makes them skeptical. This has been Matt. Now back to you in the studio.
We investigated fears of vote fraud, which was a big concern during this election, causing ballot recounts in many states.
Hello, and welcome to the W. My name is Jack Panzarella, and alongside me is Luca Sica. Did you guys have any concerns about the 2020 election? According to Fox News and New York Times, there have been many accusations and concerns that there have been voter fraud in states such as Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina all have been recounted due to these accusations.
This outcome has shown that the election is continuing to go on, so we have a fair election. It has been said to be proven that there was no voter fraud in any states, and that seems to be the correct outcome of the election. However, no matter what the case is, we all want to see who wins fair, and everyone will have no choice but to live with the results. This has been Luca, Sica, and Jack Panzarella. Back to you in the studio.
Welcome to the W.
I'm Stephen Ojeda.
And I'm Sarah Lynch. Accusations of possible miscounts of votes in this year's election has been the hot topic throughout November. According to voting sites in North Carolina, it was found that in 2 counties there were mistakes reporting their voting results. Robeson County officials forgot to report their results from one early voting site, and in Washington County, officials accidentally double-counted people's mail-in ballots.
Hundreds of President Trump supporters in Phoenix and Detroit have gone to voting centers on Wednesday, November 3rd, to demand officials stop the vote and stop the steal, as vote tallies show Democratic candidate Joe Biden emerging as winner.
Donald Trump has filed at least 17 lawsuits in various state and federal courts, most making similar claims, seeking the manual inspection of potentially thousands of in-person Election Day ballots being mishandled by poll workers and resulted in some ballot selections to be disregarded.
So far, Trump hasn't succeeded due to the lack of evidence. According to New York Times, a group of federal, state, and local officials working with the Department of Homeland Security agency declared flatly that the election was the most secure in the nation's history.
In saying that, many question, was the election really rigged, or is this all propaganda? This has been
Stephen Ojeda
and Sarah Lynch with the W. Back to you in the studio.
Can you believe that there have been dead voters casting their ballots this year? According to a report by Ryan Ordonez, allegations have been made that Philadelphia ballot counters have been violating votes from dead people.
Welcome to the W. I'm Ryan Ordonez. Are dead citizens' ballots being counted as valid votes for the 2020 presidential election? Allegations about dead American citizens voting are being fired at Philadelphia poll workers. Voter fraud has been called upon the poll workers, and City Commissioner Al Schmidt is having death threats and even tweets from President Donald Trump himself critiquing the city commissioner on the matter. Responding to the angry Americans, Schmidt has said, "I've seen the most fantastical things on social media, making completely ridiculous allegations that have no basis, in fact, at all, and seen them spread," said Schmidt. Then when asked if he had seen any evidence of this widespread fraud, Schmidt responded, "I have not. If evidence of widespread fraud, or evidence of any fraud at all, is brought to our attention, we take a look at it and we refer it to law enforcement, as we do in every election." Schmidt had even more to say on this interview with CNN.
When we took a break between everything else that we're doing, we looked it up, each one of them, to see what their vote history was. Not a single one of them voted in Philadelphia after they died. It's one of these things that kind of bounces around out there, that echoes around, that people say from one to another. They heard something, or they heard from someone who saw something that they think might have been X, Y, or Z. And it's really impossible to keep up with those.
The city commissioner looks honest about the controversial matter and wants to help more than harm the ballot counting process. So long as Schmidt's word is true, no dead citizens' ballots were being counted as valid votes. Back to you in the studio.
Presidential transitions are among the most sacred moments in the American political life cycle. It has been a core principle of American democracy for well over 200 years. Corina Bischkoff will tell you how this year's transition is not as smooth as one would hope.
Welcome to the W. I'm Corina Bischkoff. Presidential transitions are among the most sacred moments in American political lifestyle. The peaceful transfer of power from one administration to another has been a core principle of American democracy for well over 200 years. The inauguration is a ceremony to mark the start of a new 4-year term as the President of the United States. The inauguration takes place for each new presidential term, even if the president is continuing in office for the second term. The 2020 election was looked at as the most controversial election in history for its possible voter fraud and recounts in multiple states. But Joe Biden was declared the winner and is currently the president-elect. and if things don't drastically change, he will be inaugurated into office as the 46th President of the United States on January 20th, 2021. If the election was found to be rigged, as President Trump is claiming it to be, he will continue his presidency and be re-inaugurated on that same day. Inauguration Day takes place months after the election to allow enough time after Election Day for officials to gather election returns and for newly elected candidates to travel to the Capitol. Most presidents use their inaugural address to present their vision of America and to set forth their goals for the nation. The inauguration is important because we are swearing a person under oath into office, making them the current holder on the presidential position for at least 4 years until they are up for re-election. It is the start of a new direction that our country could be heading in, no matter what political party has power. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you for watching The W. Make sure you tune in for next month's annual holiday special.
This has been Luca, Sica, and Jack Panzarella signing off.